Hello, everyone. How are you? Happy May. Can't believe it. First of all, I hope that all my Jewish friends had a wonderful Passover. I want to wish our Orthodox friends Christos Anesti. Today is their Easter. And to remind us that I think it's Thursday the 5th is Yom HaShoah. We should remember those who died in the Holocaust and all of the ramifications that has had. Okay, I'll do this week what I did last time, and do the reading, the whole reading first. Now you'll see that the reading is broken down into 5 sections. All right. But before I begin, I just want to make clear now, I have been a Catholic all of my life. I have heard and read the story of the raising of Lazarus hundreds of times. And when you're a congregant sitting in the pews, you get a certain picture of the reading, what is happening, and then of course, the priest will give an interpretation when he's up there giving the homily. And there is involved in this story a certain piety involved. A certain way of going ooh and ah, and isn't this wonderful? And it's a story which is very, very, on the surface, very inspirational. Okay? The worst part of delving into these scriptures is that, at least I, especially preparing for today, began to see that this is a very, very complex reading. That if you read it on a superficial level, it's wonderful. Jesus weeps, Mary, Martha weep, they're upset over Lazarus. Lazarus is raised. That's great, I think, for people to take on to themselves and use that as an inspiration for life. But what I'm going to try to do today is go a little bit deeper to show what at least the interpreters seem to say is going on here. So let's take a look at the reading here. This is John chapter 11. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Okay. This is, interestingly enough, a reference to the next chapter in John. Okay. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sister sent a message to Jesus. Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of Man may be glorified through it. Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after he had said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. And the disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you. And are you going there again? And Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble because they see the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble because the light is not in them. After saying this, he told them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he'll be all right. Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. For your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. And Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us go that we may die with him. All right, let's just stop there for the moment and give you some background. We've been talking about John's gospel, and what John has done right from the beginning, from chapter 1, has been to prepare the reader for Jesus' death. Okay, I mean and this sign, remember we talked about signs last time, this sign is the last of the signs, the greatest of the signs. And this miracle, if you will, or this sign, kind of sums up Jesus' whole mission, all right? And it points forward to understanding his death. In the gospel, we know that there's been mounting opposition to Jesus. Many times because of what he did, because of the claims that he made to be the Son of God, and having authority that even transcends Moses' authority. And Jesus was aware right from the beginning of his pending death, even from chapter 3 on. Now, what is very interesting in the Synoptic Gospels, we hear of predictions of Jesus' death. Jesus predicts his own death. In John, what we have is an image that John uses to point to Jesus' death. And that is the expression of being lifted up. Jesus being lifted up on the cross. All right. And where does he get this image from? He actually gets this image from the Old Testament. All right. In the book of Numbers, they set out from Mount Hor by way of the Sea of Reeds to skirt the land of Edom. But the people now restive on the journey, and the people spoke against God and against Moses. Why did you make us leave Egypt to die in the wilderness? There is no bread, no water, and we have come to load this miserable food. The Lord sent seraphs, serpents, against the people. They bit the people, and many of the Israelites died. The people came to Moses and said, we have sinned by speaking against the Lord and against you. Intercede with the Lord to take away the serpents from us. And Moses interceded for the people. Then the Lord said to Moses, make a seraph figure and mount it on a standard. And if anyone who is bitten looks at it, he shall recover. Moses made a copper seraph and mounted it on a standard, and anyone who was bitten by a serpent, he would look at the copper serpent and recover. That's the Old Testament image that John uses to help us understand Jesus' death on the cross. So if you see in the summary, there are two sayings in John that refer to this. John 3:14, and just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. And in John 8, so Jesus said, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will realize that I am he, that I do nothing on my own, but I speak these things as the Father instructed me. So in a certain sense, to prepare us for the raising of Lazarus, all right, all of these signs are there And what we're dealing with basically is if we use the figure of the standard of the serpent, we're basically saying the figure or the sign of death becomes the sign of life. Okay? So what we would say is when Jesus is lifted up on the cross, as the serpent was, he who looks at that will be saved. Okay? So that's kind of John's initiation here. Now, in that first part that we just read, it seems very strange that, first of all, we have indications that there's no question that Jesus loved Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. All right? So he gets word that Lazarus is ill. First of all, he says Lazarus is asleep. And of course, his disciples, being as dense as they are, said, oh, well, if he's asleep, he'll get better. And then finally, Jesus had to say to them, hey, he's dead. Okay. But what's very interesting is that Jesus, after hearing of Lazarus' death, doesn't immediately go to Bethany. He waits 2 days. And people would say, that's rather insensitive. Your friend is dying or is ill. All right, get a move on. And Jesus said, no. This illness is to point out not just that someone died, but this illness was brought on to show ultimately the glory of God. So let's continue to read on. Jesus, the resurrection and the life. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again at the resurrection on the last day. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I have believed that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. Interesting. We now enter the picture of Martha and Mary. Now, keep in mind, in the synoptics, at one point in the town of Caesarea Philippi, Jesus asked the questions to his disciples, who do people say that I am? Right. And Peter's ultimate answer was, you are the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of the living God. Okay? And everybody goes, wow. He believes. The next scene, Jesus is saying to him, get behind me, Satan. All right? So you begin to wonder that people very often profess things and yet don't understand the ramifications. Well, interestingly enough, in this story, the same thing happened. Now again, what we have to understand, in the Synoptic Gospels, the incident that brings about the plot to kill Jesus was when Jesus cleansed the temple. He threw the money changers out of the temple. John, on the other hand, says the incident that brought about Pharisees and the elders wanting to kill Jesus was the incident of the raising of Lazarus. All right, that all has to do with theology, the theology outlook of John. But I think it's interesting. So why is that true? Well, we've already said that the illness does not have the ultimate purpose of leading to Lazarus' death. The illness was a means by which the glory of God would come about. So, here's a very, very interesting comment by one of the commentators. He said, out of love, Jesus does not go to his loved ones when they need him. Okay. Jesus does not go to his loved ones when they need him. And I think for many of us, and this is kind of a commentary, many of us believe that when we pray, we think that somehow God should answer our prayers almost right away. And here, ultimately it says, Martha and Mary want Jesus to come. Right? And very often we pray for things that we want, and somehow we don't get what we want. We get ultimately, but every prayer is answered, so we ultimately get what we need. But see, here it says, out of love for those people, he waited 2 days. He didn't come running right away. And I think we can say again, making a commentary, God pretty much has all of that in store for us too. All right? We don't always get what we want, but every prayer will be answered. All right? Here, we see how their prayer is answered, ultimately. He's hoping that the other reason he has for waiting, he's hoping to make sure, first of all, that Lazarus is dead. And secondly, by raising of Lazarus, he hopes to bring his own disciples to belief. You know, they have an idea of who he is. But just like Peter, they don't understand. And we'll see that's the same thing with Martha. Martha almost repeats the same thing that Peter says. All right. So we have Martha going out to meet him, and Mary stays at home. She confesses her faith in Jesus as a miracle worker. Okay. She confesses her faith to Jesus, but to Jesus as a miracle worker. Whatever, because she said she knew that anything that Jesus asked of his Father would be given. So we get an indication that Martha made the right response of a loyal, practicing Jew. I know my brother will rise at the resurrection on the last day, which was a Jewish belief, especially of the Pharisees. So she's basically giving the traditional theology, if you will, of Judaism. So basically, though, the faith in Jesus as a miracle worker falls short of true belief. We saw that all of last week, or the last time we were here. All right? That there are always ambiguities. Yes, I believe Jesus can perform this miracle, but is that true faith? Okay. Martha, in a certain sense, is a bit arrogant to Jesus. She says, I've known this. I've believed that you've been the Messiah and so on all along. But don't forget, as a miracle worker. Next scene has Mary coming. Jesus calls Mary. Interestingly here, what does Mary do? She gets up immediately and goes to Jesus. All right. As soon as she hears the call, she gets up. So, let's continue reading here. Jesus weeps. When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, the teacher is here and is calling to you. And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus' brother when Mary came there where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." But when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. And we're going to talk about that concept of Jesus being moved and disturbed. We'll get to it. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. All right. The shortest sentence in the gospel. Jesus wept. All right. And so the Jews said, how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Okay. So we have Mary now coming to the scene, falling at his feet, and making a profession that does not totally repeat Martha's statement. She just says, "Lord, if you had been there, my brother would not have died." All right. Now, there's also another thing going through John, is this concept that John also always uses the concept of the Jews. Now, in this context, the Jews are not necessarily those in opposition. Some may be, some may not be. But in this case, they are the Jews are there to offer consolation, which is I guess today you'd say almost they're sitting shiva. Okay. Mary responds to the presence of Jesus. To the presence of Jesus, not to any miracle that he would work. All right. The Jews were focused on the dead Lazarus. Mary focused on Jesus. The Jews who were present focused on the dead Lazarus. Mary basically states her unconditional trust in the power of the presence of Jesus. Okay. Mary reflects true faith. But like everything else in the Torah and in the Gospels, now comes the but. Okay. After showing this moment of true faith in the presence of Jesus, all right, Mary kind of falls back and begins to focus with the Jews on the dead Lazarus. She loses her focus on Jesus, and now the focus is back on the dead Lazarus. So even she, in the moment of true faith, backs off. None of us are perfect. We keep striving to arrive at true faith. It is not compassion that creates Jesus being moved to anger. Now, here's a very interesting point. We say that Jesus is moved, and we think it has something to do with compassion. We know that he loves Lazarus. But one of the things that moves Jesus is to weep and to feel agitated was the fact that he begins to realize at the end of his ministry, he begins to wonder whether anybody will understand who he is and what his mission is. And I guess in the confrontation here, he just gets frustrated. Don't they understand? When will they understand? Okay? And he kind of weeps over that. If anybody remembers the book Slaughterhouse-Five, there's a constant refrain through there, Billy Pilgrim wept. Okay? Wasn't a deep weeping, but he wept. And this is the same thing. Jesus is just weeping and being moved out of frustration. Mary turns away from Jesus and then looks back and goes back to mourning the dead Lazarus. So we go on. Jesus raises Lazarus to life. Then Jesus, again, greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. Now, the interesting thing here is that even though Jesus is angry, Jesus is frustrated, he never throws his hand up in total frustration. He just keeps going. He keeps going and going and going. So he came to the tomb. It was a cave and the stone was lying there. And Jesus said, "Take away the stone." And Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he's been dead for 4 days." And Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upwards and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. And Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." I mean, the real impact of this moment was that last phrase. From a human point of view, Jesus is totally human. He loves his friend Lazarus. And he performs the miracle, and then what is his message? He doesn't stand around and take acclamation for all of what he's done. He says, "Untie him and let him go." Now, the significance of that, I think we can kind of think about and meditate on. Now, what's very interesting, again, Martha, what does she concentrate on? Because, they asked him to take away the stone, and Martha's concentrating on, well, he stinks. He's been here 4 days. Now, 4 days is very interesting, because in the Jewish tradition, the spirit still remains hovering over a dead body for 3 days. Okay. So here, Jesus on the 4th day, performs this miracle. The other thing to look at, I think, which is very, very significant, when Lazarus emerges from the tomb, he's still bound in the death cloths. Okay? So he has to be unbound. The image here, he's going to go through this again. So save those clothes. All right? As a contrast, at the resurrection of Jesus, what do they find in the tomb? They find the death cloths of Jesus folded there, as if to say he doesn't need them anymore. All right? So I think the imagery here takes on kind of deep meaning. All right? So, finally, the plot to kill Jesus. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. Okay, so there was some sort of belief here. All right? Maybe not true belief, but at least through the signs, as we talked about the last time, through the signs, all right, they've come to believe. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what he had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the council and said, "What are we to do? This man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and destroy both our holy place and our nation." But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all. You do not understand that it is better for you to have one man die for the people than to have the whole nation destroyed." He did not say this on his own, he did not say this on his own, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was about to die for the nation. And not for the nation only, but to gather into one the dispersed children of God. So from that day on, they planned to put him to death. Jesus therefore no longer walked about openly among the Jews, but went from there to a town called Ephraim in the region near the wilderness, and there he remained with his disciples. So basically what we have now is this miracle brings about the opposition, that straw that breaks the camel's back. All right. Many of the Jews believed in him. So there, when they use the concept to Jews, it's not in any degrading sense of the word. Don't forget, when John uses the word the Jews, it's always those in opposition to Jesus. All right? And we talked about, given the historical context of John's community, but we can talk more about that. So basically, Caiaphas prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, which again is the great irony. Because in the Christian tradition, we look at the prophet Isaiah in the prophecies of the suffering servant, and in one of those prophecies, the suffering servant of God would be the one who would suffer for the nation. So in a certain sense, there are very definite ambiguities in here, and it's not just as straightforward, but it gives us to think about what true faith demands. And in a certain sense, we can easily, unless we keep developing it, bounce back and forth from moments of true faith to semi-faith, even disbelief. Okay? So on that note, we take a look at the end of what interpreters call the book of signs. From here on, Jesus begins to talk about and live through his passion and death. So I thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Can you hear me? All right. Let's see what we have. So, thank you, Don. Last time we began with, we're talking about the signs, and how signs in Hebrew are called ot. And actually the word ot in Hebrew is also the word for letter. So literally every letter of the scripture is actually a sign. And the ambiguity that Don just finished with, you can believe, you can kind of vacillate between believing or non-believing. It's up to you if you see the signs or not. Just to summarize a little bit of what we talked about last time, that signs, the most important thing about a sign is to point out, right? It's like a road sign. So you're not supposed to focus on the sign. When you see a stop sign, you're not supposed to stare at the stop sign. You're supposed to stare at the road, right? So it's the same thing. We're not supposed to focus on the sign, but see what the sign wants to tell us beyond. And this is really the point. I made the distinction that in Judaism or the Torah talks about two separate signs, the revealed signs and the hidden signs. And the revealed signs are the signs that, of course, we're shocked when we see them. The hidden signs are the signs that we tend to already take for granted. That the sun rises every morning. No, that's it's not a miracle anymore because it happens all the time, and we take it for granted. So the point for the revealed signs is to not focus on those signs, right? But to point out that God is all around, that the hidden signs are also miracles, that all our existence is in the hands of God, right? Not just a revealed miracle. So I want to start today with a story from the Talmud about a servant who goes to the well with her jug, and she goes to the well, she wants to take water out, and the jug falls into the well. And it goes deep into the well, and she's very sad. Her jug is not there anymore. What is she going to do? So she cries, but nobody can bring her jug. Months later, the princess comes to the well, and her jug, her golden jug, falls into the well as well. And the servant sees this, and she starts singing. And everybody's asking her, "What are you singing?" And she said, "He who will go down to pick up the jug of the princess will bring my jug as well." Okay, why is this relevant to what we're talking about? Sometimes we need an extra thing, right? Someone that is a bigger force to come and sweep everything, right? The death of Lazarus, if I give that example, is the death or the fall of the jug of the servant's jug. Later on, when Jesus himself dies and resurrects, that's the vessel of the princess, right? By bringing that back, it brings everything back. Right? That whole idea that Jesus died for humanity's sins basically brings back death from where it went, right? Altogether. Jesus doesn't claim that Lazarus' resurrection is the ultimate overcoming death or sin, but it would be eventually himself. But as far as Jesus performing miracles, that was the ultimate, in a sense, miracle that he himself as a human being performed. Right? Later on, that sign is supposed to show that God performs the ultimate miracle, right, by bringing back Jesus back. Right? So, this is the idea of the resurrection. We talked about all these signs last time. And resurrection is the ultimate sign. Why is it ultimate sign? Because, as we said, miracles, revealed or hidden, supposed to show us that God overcomes the physical reality. Right? There's nothing is beyond God's ability to manipulate physical reality. That doesn't mean that God will intervene all the time, and that's how we ended the session last time with these questions. God can intervene all the time, but why wouldn't he intervene? Because there is a natural right? Natural. Even the natural is a miracle, but a natural way that we're supposed to live. And the whole idea here is that because we're in a classroom, right? This whole world is temporary, and we're in a classroom. If the teacher will keep changing the rules, right, then we're not going to be able to learn anything and to progress. And the point is, right, one day to not be able to perform revealed miracles at all. Right? Last time we were between Passover, it was the last class was before Passover. Now we're a day after Passover. And I was talking about how the Jewish calendar begins on Passover, right, with big miracles, revealed miracles, one after the other. And 11 months later, right, because Purim is actually a month before Passover, but it really actually 11 months after. And then we're supposed to learn how to, when we ride the bicycle, right, the revealed miracles are the training wheels, and eventually take them off. So by Purim, the book of Esther has no mention of God, the name of God even, right? So it's all hidden. And we mentioned that the word Esther, the book of Esther, the word Esther in Hebrew means hidden. That God is hidden in the world. So this is really the introduction and summary to what we've been up to now. Concentrating now on the miracle of resurrection itself, from the Jewish perspective, it's a very interesting topic because it's not mentioned in the Torah, and it's not mentioned literally in even the rest of the prophet and the writing. There's nothing that would say specifically that there's the resurrection of the dead. But the rabbis drew signs from the text from the Torah that showed us that God overcomes everything and gives life back. Right? God creates life and brings life back. Okay? Maimonides actually wrote down the 13 principles of the Jewish faith. He lived in a Muslim and Jew and Christian context where these two religions had some dogma. And he needed to answer those who said, why Judaism doesn't have? What is your dogma? What do you stand for? So he wrote the 13 principles of faith, and the last one is that you have to believe in the resurrection of the dead from the Torah. Right? And you won't say you have to believe in something from the Torah if it had already written in the Torah. Right? Because that's superfluous. If it's written in Torah, of course you should believe that it's from the Torah, but because it's not written specifically, then he had to mention that you have to believe it from the Torah. And the Mishnah said, if you don't believe in the resurrection of the dead, you have no place in the next world, in the Jewish community, or in the resurrection of the dead. Because if you don't believe in it, why should you have it? Right? Okay. So the resurrection of the dead is the ultimate sign, as Don said, not just from God's perspective, but from our perspective. It's the ultimate sign of faith, that we believe in God. If we can understand that concept. Okay? So when we lose our jug, when our jug falls, we have to believe, like the servant who stood by the well, that one day somebody will come and bring out all the jugs out. Okay? And that's the principle of the resurrection of the dead. Okay. The story that we looked at from John is the people of Israel walking in the desert, and at a certain point think that they have no food. They complain, right? after all the miracles that they saw. And this is very interesting, because what they did is, I'll just read again the story from my translation, and it says, they journeyed from Mount Hor by way of the Sea of Reeds to go around the land of Edom, and the spirit of the people grew short on the way. Right? The people spoke against God and Moses. Why did you bring us up from Egypt to die in the wilderness? So there's no food and no water, and our soul is disgusted with the insubstantial food. Okay, at that point, God said, all right, they need something really, really, a sign that will be above all signs. Okay? So what do? And this is where the Hebrew comes in that doesn't really show in the story in the New Testament. So what does Moses do? So they start dying. God punishes them by death, right? And of course, illness. So illness is the sign of death. It's not the ultimate death, but it's partial death. So it's a warning sign, right? You have to be aware. And how do they die? They die by snakes, right? Serpents, snakes. Now, in the translation, I didn't hear the word snake, a serpent, that Moses, to save the people, makes a serpent really on the nest. So God tells Moses to put a seraph, right? God doesn't tell Moses to create a serpent, at least not in the text. He tells him to put a seraph on the nest. Now, nest in Hebrew means a miracle, and we mentioned it last time. The month of the leaving Egypt, the month that we're still in now, is called Nisan, the month of miracles. Okay, that's the revealed miracle. God tells, nest is also a high place, but which means the same idea, right? It's a very clear sign, banner, however you want to interpret that. So God tells Moses, put something on a banner, on a very high sign, and put a seraph on it. Seraph is as we know the word seraph before, is like an angel, is a messenger from God. And this is, by the way, when I prepared today with Don, this is why I love doing this. Because I would never imagine that the Christianity takes that symbol of putting the copper snake on the stick and say, this is Jesus. This is amazing. This is he has to be put on a banner. So it's an amazing view of that. But we'll explain the connection, because this is exactly the connection from this story. So the banner is really that sign, that miracle. Is you think that now everybody's looking at the serpent that Moses put on the stick, and you think, the serpent now, that stick now is saving the people, right? Everybody who looks at that serpent will be saved. But really, the miracle is not that. What did God really want to show the people? Again, it goes back to the same theme, that the revealed miracles is clearly a revealed miracle, right? People are dying, they're being attacked by snakes, and then Moses puts a copper snake on a stick, and people who look at it heal. Clearly, there's a revealed miracle here. But that's not the point. The point is for people who looked, right, and wanted to be healed, they looked it up, they are healed because they understand, not that this is healing them, it's because that God is behind it, right? So this is the point. The point is that they're not being saved by the serpent on the stick. They're saved because they understand that God gives life and God takes life. Which means the real miracle here was not that they're now being saved by that. The real miracle is that they walked for 40 years and have not been attacked. That's the real miracle. That's what they really needed to see. That they've lived all this time in a miraculous existence. When they complained, they just took God's protection off of them. They didn't do anything else. So God said, okay, you don't understand that the source of life is, I'm the source of life, then, okay, I'm not protecting you anymore. And you wanted, because it says that they were impatient, right? And actually, some of the commentators give them actually the benefit of the doubt, like all the time. We give the Israelites the benefit of the doubt because after all, this is the people that God chose to take out of Egypt and bring them. So we try to figure out, there's something to give them the benefit of the doubt. So the benefit of the doubt is that they actually were eager to come to the land, to get to the land already. And this is what, same thing like the golden calf, that they wanted to worship God only in a foreign way. So for them, they wanted to they lived in this high existence, and they wanted some ground. They wanted to be grounded. They wanted to get to work, right? So God said, okay, on my time, not your time, right? Just like in the Garden of Eden. If I say wait and don't eat from the tree of knowledge, you wait, right? It's not the time yet. So they were in a hurry, so they complained, and God said, okay, then I'm removing the protection. You will see now what it means to live an earthly life and deal with the snakes, literally, around you, right? Bringing us right back into the Garden of Eden, right? Where the serpent was there. And this is a very theological concept because we keep saying, why would the Garden of Eden have a serpent? Why would God put a serpent? Because God decides all that, right? But as God takes life, the same method He brings the life back, right? So it's the same thing. They are hurt by the snakes, and those who believe and understood that they were actually protected all this time, they look back to the up, and they understand that it's from God, and they heal. It's the same story of Moses fighting with the Amalekites, and he lifts up his hands and making that miracle that every time that his hands were up, they won. Every time his hands were down, they were losing. It's not because of Moses' hands, right? It's because he pointed out to heaven that they need to look up. Okay. Now for the last story that I think is really the point of all this. And this is what Don alluded to several times, that the point of the resurrection of Lazarus was to show God's glory. Right? And this is, to me, it's a baffling idea. You kill somebody to show the glory of God. So first of all, the idea that God gives life and brings back life, that's already a calming notion, because it means that life that is lost one day will come back, right? Just like the servant with her jug. One day, all the jugs, there will be a reason, and all the jugs will come up and will reunite. But for now, we have to understand that God gives life and takes life. Right? And this is the glory of God. The ultimate sign is to show the glory of God, that God created this world and God controls the nature in the world. The story I want to read is the story of the two sons of Aaron. The context is the 8th day after the tabernacle was established in the desert. They built it for a whole year, and they're ready to start worshiping God. And after Aaron does his worship, his sons come in, and we say, and this is the story that we read on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year. They come in and they sacrifice, they bring a foreign fire, whatever that means. They could have a good intention. Maybe they had good intention. I would like to believe that, of course. They had good intention, but they hurried something. They went too fast. They didn't go through what Iris taught us in the last parasha class on Thursday, systematic theology. Right? God wants to show us that there's a system in this world, right? That's why He can't perform miracles every day. Because then, where is the system? Where are we growing? Where are we learning? Right? So, systematic theology. So, they did something wrong. They went too fast, and literally God zapped them. The fire, they burnt on the spot. That's a big idea now. They're the sons of the first high priest on their first time bringing sacrifice to God, and they died. So leaving that aside, what's even more interesting, and that really wraps everything together, is Moses' answer to Aaron. So Aaron was silent. He did not react. He didn't say anything, right? But Moses tells him that God, from God's perspective, it is that God shows His glory through those who are the closest to Him. Okay, this is how God shows His glory, through those who are closest to Him. And now we'll solve that, and I think that'll wrap everything together. So I'm just going to read it. The sons of Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, each took his fire pan. They put fire in them and placed incense upon it. And they brought before Hashem an alien fire that He had not commanded them. A fire came from before God and consumed them, and they died before God. Moses says to Aaron, "Of this did God speak, saying, I will be sanctified through those who are nearest to me. Thus I will be honored before the entire people." And Aaron was silent. Okay? So, Aaron is the high priest. He has to understand something. Right? They are now worshiping God in the tent of meeting. They're meeting with God. Right? To show God's glory in this world is to admit that God is the creator of this world and controls nature in this world. Okay? Aaron has to understand he cannot say anything, because if he would have said anything, right, that means that he's doubting God's system, right? God's natural conduct in this world, as opposed to the Israelites who sin by their speech, right? And they doubt God's not only system but timing, which is probably when we say timing is everything, it could be true, because in the Garden of Eden it was the timing. The Talmud says If they waited a little longer, the tree of knowledge would have been permitted. If they would have waited a little longer in this story, they would have entered the land already. It's not rushing or doubting, not just God's system, but God's timing. So God takes the two sons of Aaron, and now is the biggest issue now. What am I doing? Aaron, by his silence, right? Jesus waiting 3 days, 2 days extra after the 2 days, saying Lazarus is totally dead. There's nothing here. It's really the only way to show you God's glory, that God controls everything, is waiting these 4 days and then bringing that back. So you can't say anything. That is the point. To not say anything. Even though that we have that power of speech, the highest level of using it is not using it. Right? We choose we choose to be silent. Right? That's the essence of our prayer, right? The silence. And that's the highest place. For Aaron to say, I'm not saying anything. And not only that, his children do not come back right away, right? There's no miracle there. When will be the miracle? When will they come back? At the end of days. Then they will come back. And Aaron, at that point, has to take the training wheels and say, okay, I'm not saying anything. I'm just waiting. I understand that God's glory, this is, by his silence, he showed God's glory. That the high priest says, I understand. That's bringing God's glory. And that was the biggest sign that Aaron could perform, of course, in front of the people of Israel and his children at the tent of meeting. Thank you. Okay.
Any questions?
They're silent.
No, never.
I think it was Elijah. It's been a while since I read it. That I think if a child or man died and he went over the body and like Elijah, he brought him back to life again. Is that Elijah?
Elisha, yeah.
Was it Elisha or what?
Elisha. I think it was
Elisha?
Yeah, there are stories. For example, the Ezekiel's dry bones that they bring it back, and the child, but he didn't wait 3 days. It was right there, so it wasn't like the ultimate resurrection of the dead. It was he resuscitated him. The story of Lazarus is more of bringing somebody from the dead. The child was not, it wasn't 4 days later. It could have been that he was resuscitated. So it's a difference between resuscitation and rise of the dead. So there's really no specific mention of raising the dead. The Talmud, though, has some stories. The same time as Jesus, other rabbis performed miracles of raising dead. For some reason, Jesus is not many, but there are a couple of stories like that. I think the issue with also the miracle of Jesus is that there was a political also component in it, and this way that's really what got him ultimately in trouble. Not that he raised the dead, but that it was almost a political challenge.
You notice that the Caiaphas and the elders, they basically were afraid that Jesus was going to take people away from them. And when that began to happen, somehow there would be some problem with the protection of the Romans. And they didn't want that. So that whole idea goes right through, as we saw in John's community, that the biggest fear that the Christians had were in John's community towards the end of the first century was to be thrown out of the synagogue. Because once they were thrown out of the synagogue, and we see that happening, and that's why there is so much animosity between John's community and the Jews, right, is because once they were thrown out of the synagogue, they also lost the protection civilly, and therefore could be openly persecuted by Rome. As long as the Jews were tolerated by Rome, and as long as you were considered as part of Judaism, you were fine. You were under Roman protection. Okay? Jack?
You mentioned earlier that in the Old Testament, the word resurrection or concept directly is not used. All right. We have Maccabees as part of our canon. That word is used there. All right. I'm just putting that out.
Maccabees is not part of the Jewish canon. But even in Maccabees, I don't think it's directly, but it talks about the life beyond, that you can somehow help the souls who moved on.
Then you use the Maimonides or Moses, okay, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Could you say that's oral tradition, his idea of resurrection?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
The principle of the resurrection at the end of days, Tchiyat HaMeitim, the living again of the dead, is in oral tradition. But of course, oral tradition is based on scripture. It's just these signs, because the ultimate sign, God, and this is something that through learning, rabbis always say that God can't put the biggest sign in front of you all the time. Because if He did, you lose your freedom of choice. You won't live according to what you believe. So, and there is an idea of reward and punishment in the theology here. So, you have to leave room for ambiguity. So there's a lot of signs within the text of God giving and taking lives. That's for sure. But they're not spelled out like, Trump on a with golden letters on a building. Just trying to, right there.
It seems as if Aaron gave up his human response in that instant. I could see, it's almost instantaneously he was silent. Mm-hmm. He didn't step back and speak, and then wish he had been silent. Mm-hmm. That's very difficult.
Of course. That's why he brought the glory of God. Of course. He, in a sense, stepped beyond his humanity, right? The natural reaction of a human would be to shout and yell, but he was silent because he saw the sign, right? There was a stop sign there, and he realized his children just didn't obey the stop sign. But the stop sign says that it's God's system here. So you have to obey the signs. And by being silent, he gave God the front stage. and that's bringing glory, the glory of God.
I think too that there's another story which brings that whole concept out. Is the book of the prophet Ezekiel. All right, Ezekiel is basically, when his wife dies, is basically commanded that you will not mourn the death of your wife. You will not mourn the death of your wife. Okay? So for you are to continue to move on and do as I am asking you to do. And I think even in the New Testament, we've heard it so often, but Jesus is basically telling his disciples, you talk about the human element, all right? If you are a disciple of mine, then you have to put your own flesh and blood family behind. And human reaction, and we talked about this last time, we would say that blood is thicker than water. But here, what Jesus is really saying, being part of my family is more important than being part of your own flesh and blood. And from a human point of view, that's not easy. So God really demands of people, even in these scriptures, there is a real, if you're going to go the next mile, then there is a real challenge. All right? And if you keep going the next mile, your faith is getting deeper. And you begin to understand why all of these things were said in the first place. You no longer have to sit and question. All of a sudden, there is this understanding of why he said. But that demands a growth and a journey in discipleship.
I thought it was interesting from a Christian point of view that Lazarus and Martha and Mary disappear from the record after this. The apostles are in the Acts of the Apostles and some of the early church members, but these very important people are just gone. So
there is a quirk in interpretation, and some say, now there's not too much to back this up, but because Lazarus is referred to as your beloved friend, some people think that Lazarus was the beloved apostle or the beloved disciple in John.
Mm-hmm.
There's very little to back that up, but there is that trend. But you're right. And again, what we do know for sure is that Lazarus is going to die again.
He's got his cloth ready. He's prepared.
Any other questions?
Is it my understanding, actually I have two, that the Romans liked having the Israelites in charge because they kept order at that time. I mean, they had a system, they followed the many commandments, and they kept peace and order in the territory, which was a beautiful thing. And my other understanding, and I think it's really true, John brings out the name of Lazarus was mentioned specifically because if he had not mentioned the name of Lazarus, all the dead might have come out. And I believe Augustine was the one that first presented that.
I think the last point of if he would not have mentioned his name.
Right, all the dead may have come out.
When if he wouldn't have been specific.
Right.
That's very interesting.
Right.
That's St. Augustine's interpretation. Yeah. So, there's a similar midrash about Moses' argument with God before entering the land, when Moses tries one more time to ask God to enter the land. And there's a midrash that said that actually there was a whole conversation, and God said to Moses, you know what, okay, if you really want to go in, meaning you want yourself, right, specifically name yourself, to enter the land, that's okay, but the price would be that there would be no resurrection of the dead. It's a very interesting, it took me several years to think about the connection, but I see the connection because if you are in relationship with somebody and they want the gift now, you don't hurry love, so to speak, this is, eventually it'll come, but you can't hurry it. If you really want it right now, you're acting, you're being the opposite of altruistic, right? You're not putting yourself away. You're putting yourself in the middle. Then you're going to take away from what can happen much better in the future. Before, I want to actually add another element that was here. The Israelites in the desert died with snakes. And then what they're healed from is a snake. So it's the same element that hurt them, brings them back. So that's another sign, in a sense, that what you think takes away life can bring back life, and it goes back to the original place where God took the life of a human being, which, saying, you now will die because you disobeyed me, but it all happened because of the serpent. And really, if you want to go back to life, you have to do something with the serpent. We're not going to get into this whole thing, but it has to be something with the serpent that eventually will happen. And I know that at least in Christianity, and there's some Jewish sources about that eventually the woman steps on the serpent's head, and because she was his target, and then eventually she kills the serpent and basically redeems it. The same thing happens on Passover. Passover, we just finished Passover, but how do you prepare for Passover? How do you make your dishes and kitchen kosher for Passover? You take the dish, every dish has different method of cleaning because it depends on what you used it before. So if you just used it to heat up water, you just have to boil it with water. But if you cooked with it, you have to burn it. You have to go with it with the burning, the fire. And I'll just give one more little thing in the Hebrew that doesn't come out from the translation, is that the saraf, that angel of God that he tells him put it on a nes, on a stick, on a high place. In the Hebrew, the word saraf is to burn. To burn. It's lisrof from srifa. So they're different angels, and saraf is depicted as something, I guess, with fire or something, but it burns everything. So it's a very harsh kind of cleaning. Yeah. Okay. Liz?
Okay. Every word in today's readings, every word is chosen so carefully. Every line means something so intense. There's not one extra word in here that's extraneous. Why do you think that John then put in the last line about Thomas, who says, "Let us go that we may die with him"? I mean, did Thomas get it?
No. Thomas did not understand. All he saw was not the glorification of Christ, but saw it on the negative side. And in fact, it's the only place in John's gospel where the verb to die comes up. All right? But he doesn't get it. Like most of them. That's why Jesus said to them, we're going to wait here, because by waiting, I hope by raising Lazarus, you too will believe. So apparently the disciples were having their second thoughts.
I have a question about this. When you read, it says that the Jews focused on the dead Lazarus
Right.
instead of Jesus.
Right.
So can you explain that more?
Well, I think what John is trying to, and don't forget, you have to keep it within the context of let's say, John's theology. It's the idea that, and I think John wants to bring that out, to those who are opposed to him in a certain sense, are going to look at the dead person rather than looking at him as the source of life. So the focus in John's theology was they were focusing, as Mary ultimately did too. They went back to focus on the dead Lazarus, not on the presence and the meaning of the presence of Jesus in their midst.
But the dead Lazarus means what? That they're focused on the sign, on the miracle?
No, they're focused on, I would say, not so much the negative, but
It's like Aaron would now start mourning for his children,
right?
instead of saying God gave, God took.
Right.
May God's name be glorified.
But
That's
in
what
this
we
situation,
say. Adonai natan, Adonai lakah, Yehi Shem Adonai mevorach me'ata v'adam. May God be blessed forever and ever.
But I think again that whole point points to the idea of faith. All right, what is true faith? And the faith is either or. Either you are focused on the glory and presence of God, and here for Christians on Christ, as he says, the resurrection and the life, or you focused on the element of death rather than on life and resurrection. And I think John uses that to just bring out the contrast. Fits within the context of understanding faith.
Okay, I think we're done here. Thank you very much.
Our next get together is June 5th. June 5th. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.